Hello and welcome everyone, wherever you may be. My name is Peter Jegan and I'm hosting Data Founders, a series of interviews with entrepreneurs and investors who work on data science startups. In this interview, it's number 9 actually, I'm talking to Antti Karjalainen, who is the co-founder, the CEO and the co-founder of Robocorp, an open source robotic process automation platform. Pleasure to have you here, Antti.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
Awesome. So to kick off, can you briefly introduce yourself? Maybe tell us a bit more about your background.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Antti, one of the founders, kind of the original founder behind Robocorp and the CEO of the company. My background starts out as a software engineer. I'm currently in Finland, but the company actually is in the Bay Area in the US. So we're split across multiple countries, operating this as a fully distributed organization. But kind of my background personally is from Finland, and I've been studying engineering, software engineering particularly, and then working as a software engineer for some time, and then gradually got into more entrepreneurial topics. Went to a side hobby business school at some point because we do have free education in Finland. And that was an interesting weekend project, I'd say. And then through that experience, got more and more sucked into the world of business, and eventually ended up starting a consulting firm, which then was later acquired, and then after that started this company that's now Robocorp.
Mm-hmm. That's a very interesting background, and as far as I can see for you, it was more or less smooth transition, right? So you started as an engineer, but you did have some interesting background, some interesting experience unrelated to engineering. So I'm curious to learn what are maybe the skills or learnings outside of the software engineering that you get across these different experiences, and that actually became very useful when you became a CEO in a startup.
Yeah, so I think from my day-to-day job, I use a lot of my engineering skills. I'm involved in product decisions, make decisions on various technical frameworks. So it's highly technical on my side on most parts, but I don't need to go into the really the fine detail. But I do like to understand them on the high level. On the actual other skills that I've learned and that I use day to day, they are mostly on the business side, but it's not like your traditional business school learning. So I do read balance sheets and these kind of things, but and when we do funding rounds, it's good to understand those topics, but is more of a general understanding of the world through business lens, where you can, through experience, you can apply that knowledge. And obviously it's something that I'm constantly learning at the same time, reading a lot of material, reading a lot of books and so forth. But just having those general frameworks of thought, I'd say the engineering framework and then the business framework, and combining those, that can be a useful thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if we look a bit deeper in these, what you call business frameworks, I would call them maybe some skill sets or skills. What would be the most important things that somebody with a technical background needs to acquire maybe before launching a startup? Is it marketing? Is it PR, HR, sales? Because there are a lot of different fields, but what are the most important ones in your opinion?
That's a tough question. There are so many things to know. You listed a bunch of them. I really can't pinpoint any of those. Everyone has their strengths, obviously, and you need to be aware of what's involved in, let's say, marketing, and not to just overlook that topic kind of altogether. You need to understand what you don't really know and understand well, and just make sure that you have people who know it better than you. So marketing, for me at least, is an area where I'm constantly learning right now as we are going to market and actually hiring people for different types of marketing roles, and I'm constantly learning new things about them. And And so you just need to understand like what's around you. Like maybe I'd say that just see the world outside of engineering and realize that it's a big world and it's a nuanced world as well.
Yeah, the engineering itself is quite a galaxy, and outside is another one maybe. And the thing that usually, at least what I can see, that usually the co-founding team, the founding team helps to distribute all this different knowledge across the team. Somebody knows a bit of marketing, somebody else a bit of HR, etc. So what was your experience with finding the co-founders? How did you actually meet these people with whom you started Robocorp?
Yeah, so I picked my first co-founder, Teppo, when I had my kind of initial idea that I felt strongly that we need to start pushing for this idea and make this a reality. It was this like distinct moment. I remember I was driving in my car and I just felt strongly about it and I wanted to start something. So I enlisted Teppo, who was a business partner of mine from my consulting days. So he was actually the CEO of a consulting firm, and I just knew that we kind of hit it off pretty well because we've been working already together. So I think there the criteria was that when we were working together in the previous firm, we never fought together. So we might have argued, but we didn't fight per se. So that's a good trait in a co-founder. A lot of startups actually fall in pieces when the founding team starts fighting with each other. So try to avoid that at least to make your personalities somehow match. And then the second co-founder that we had was Jouko, who actually had a lot of experience on operating companies internationally, and that's what we wanted to do from the start. So we were a Finnish team, and we wanted to start a company in San Francisco. And there's 10 hours of time difference, and a long way to San Francisco from Finland, and we didn't have any network. So we wanted to get somebody in, not like a network person. I'd advise against getting like a network person to your founding team, but at least somebody who has the general understanding of like how do you set up your structure and how do you operate that whole group of companies that you're setting up. Not to say that anyone should set it up the same way as we did, but for us it makes sense to have somebody with that sort of a business side experience. And then the fourth co-founder that I listed was Sampo, who's one of the smartest engineers that I know and really hard worker. So we just wanted to have the raw engineering talent as well represented in the founding team. It's a technical founding team that we have mostly.
And did you meet him as well through the consultancy?
Yeah, actually, I had been working with Sampo before, and he was my boss before. He was always giving me hard time about my pull requests, so I thought that he's gonna do well.
That's an amazing story. And you mentioned that you were driving a car when that idea like hit you. Was it more like an insight, or really it was an accumulating process that you were thinking about this idea, thinking, and at a certain moment just quantity became quality, I would say. How this idea actually evolved into you?
Yeah, so the original kind of it's a long series of consequences in a way. So I was at my university's alumni conference in 2016. Remember, the company started 2019, so 2016 I was at this alumni conference, and I bumped into this thing. Somebody was presenting about RPA, and I looked at it and I was like, that's strange. That seems pretty odd thing to do. Automate applications in that way, and how come is that any different from software test automation? And I happen to have a pretty intimate relationship with software test automation because a year before that we had actually started a non-profit organization around an open source project called RoboFramework, and that's a project that has been around for more than a decade, and so we wanted to it was also like a project where we knew all the key contributors. So we wanted to push that project forward. We had a great community. So I was involved in creating that first non-profit organization around it, and we were planning to host conferences, and we've done that since. But so I had this kind of affiliation with this open source community around RoboFramework, and I thought that, wait a second, that RPA thing looks exactly the same as on the technical level as RoboFramework. Like, how is it any different? And then I actually like went and started, just out of some reason, I started get to know RPA better. I started interviewing people because it was really like enterprisey. You couldn't actually download anything online or get access to any tools. So I just went, called people and started interviewing them and understanding the space. And through that process, the next year our consultancy was acquired by a larger firm. So while we were sort of fusing with that bigger firm, I learned that they had actually people doing RPA internally. So when I first got my keys to the new office, it was a 700-person company, so it was quite a large place, and I got my keys to the new office. The first thing I did, I went to the RPA department there and started asking around, and so I really, through that discovery process, from the first learning that and drawing the kind of making the similarity, understanding it between this open source world, and then I had this chance to actually go really deep through this acquisition that happened at the same time, and I had access to all these people and technology. I started to kind of realize that there's actually a need for this, that we could build it, and we just had our was it the first RoboFramework conference? We had that, and I just felt that the community was so kind of lively and engaged, and I felt really strongly that, you know, I'm probably the only person around who could make all these connections and pull them together. So I just felt that if I don't do it, I'm wasting a huge opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. You touched upon multiple very interesting themes. Theme number one, open source itself. Not everything can be open sourced, right? We will talk about that as well. Theme number two, which I find very interesting, and I guess it will be useful for many tech founders, is kind of the idea of repurposing. Maybe when you look at certain piece of technology and you have this unique perspective that allows you to reuse it somewhere else, with very interesting consequences. So that's theme number two, and I guess let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah.
Do you have any maybe framework or any reflections about this moment of repurposing? How somebody can spot something that can be reused in a very interesting way?
Yeah, good question. I don't know if there's a generic framework around that necessarily, because I had been involved in that software test automation world for that time, and I kind of understood how that works. I think it was a huge coincidence that I was on that lecture seeing that those people talking about RPA. Otherwise, I probably would have been like 2 years late to the game already. And so it was like really early realization that thing looks like that thing, and we could do that better with Python instead of using legacy Windows tech and all that. So I unfortunately I don't have any like really generic insight on that, but the way I thought about it was that, you know, we could build something from scratch for RPA, or then we could take kind of an ecosystem that has been built over a decade and use all the integrations, all the tooling, all the pieces that are available, and just repurpose it tiny bit to make it fit into this RPA use case. And that allows us to leapfrog at least like 2-3 years of development effort. So So we took that path rather than trying to build something from scratch. Maybe if I would have been in let's say living in San Francisco and I could have called my Stanford roommate buddy to invest $1 million in my idea, I could have taken another path, but I didn't have that luxury. I just had to make something happen without any funding in the beginning. So that's why we took that path of repurposing an existing ecosystem into something new.
That's an interesting perspective, and I've heard about two approaches, more or less generic. So one approach to repurposing is very deep domain expertise. So what I'm saying is that when you know something really deeply, let's say in your case it was testing software, testing frameworks, then you you are able to do analogies and to see how to use that thing that you deeply know to something else. And another approach is really very contradictory to this one. It's like about knowing at the high level lots of different things. So when you know a lot of different things at a high level, you can probably combine kind of a puzzle. That's typically what venture capital investors like me do. I know a lot of things, but my depth is, to be honest, not super deep. In your case, my understanding was that it was about
the first. Yeah. If you have that framework, then I think that fits to the first one. I think I've seen. I often talk to people who are not deep in the RPA world, for instance, and they try to draw all these kind of parallels, and to me they just like somehow sound a bit silly even. Like let's say some of these legacy RPA tools, they might have executives who come and explain that these RPA tooling will replace all the test automation tooling in the world. And it's like, no, it's definitely not gonna do that for sure, and there's really good reasons why it's not gonna do, but they are looking at it from so high level that for them it makes a ton of sense. But for me as a kind of a domain expert in that technology, it doesn't begin to make sense even. So I think the first framework is maybe more useful.
Okay, interesting to know that for you it worked, because I've heard different options, different scenarios, and I guess there is no kind of one fits all solution. It really options.
Yeah, it depends on your kind of the thing that you're coming up with. So in my case, it's highly technical.
Yeah.
So
let's chat a bit about open source. What I'm curious to learn is why actually open source? There are not a lot, but there are some RPA solutions that have nothing to do with open source, and there are some other products that are not open source. What was your logic and what's your framework to decide actually, can that problem be solved through open source or not really?
Yeah, I think it is really natural to me to apply an open source approach. Firstly, because I have a developer background. So if you look at developers for the past 30 years, the most significant improvement in software productivity has been driven by open source software. So that's just natural. It's like you cannot build anything without open source. And so when we are building something like an RPA platform, it's a horizontal thing. It requires you to connect into tens and even hundreds of different technologies. If I would have unlimited budget, I might try to go and build it out all myself, but that would be still foolish, because you have the world full of all sort of cool open source projects that you can just leverage and combine in ways that make sense in this application area. So it's just just like a pure pragmatic developer decision to go that way. The second thing was that when I started understanding RPA, the world of RPA talks about citizen developers, and so they have this pitch that this RPA software is so easy to use that anyone can use it, even your accountant could take an RPA suite and automate their own task workflows. But that's when I started going really deep into RPA, I understood that that's not ever going to happen. And really, I saw this kind of promise of these low code or no code tools that you just drag and drop some boxes and combine them, and you all of a sudden make these really intricate automation workflows happen. That wasn't working at all. So whenever you would go into anything more complex than your trivial use case, it would break down, and you would have edge cases, and you just couldn't make it work. Second was that non-technical people, business people, were really not that interested in building automation in the first place. It wasn't their job to do that. So I understood that RPA development is fundamentally a space for actual developers or people with scripting knowledge, people with IT backgrounds. And so for these people, open source makes more sense than proprietary tooling. So it was maybe a combination of, you have a horizontal product, and second is that you have a user base that's technical and they appreciate open source software.
Yes, these are both very interesting pillars, or both very interesting lens of a certain framework, which is probably agnostic to RPA. So my understanding, what you're saying is, if you see something horizontal, not a special software for banking or not a special software for, I don't know, biotechnology, it's a horizontal infrastructural platform, let's call it, right? And then you understand that the user base is quite technical and likes to build things, then there might be an opportunity for open source, right? Yeah. So that's my, okay. It's interesting, very interesting lens. And to my understanding, there are a lot of challenges, obviously, with open source, right? But one of the challenges I wanted to touch on today, maybe one of many, is product management. Because typically, even in the normal startup, normal company, let's call it normal with quotes, it's difficult to prioritize, right? You have different customers, especially at the early stage, when customers may push you to customize. But how do you prioritize what to build within the open source?
Yeah, that's a good question. So in open source, you actually have this benefit that you can leverage the community as well. You don't need to build everything in-house. So we actually done a number of projects where we incorporate some sort of a key technology into our automation stack by working closely with the community. You might work with somebody who's a core maintainer of a project, and then just through funding or support, sponsor some feature development. We might actually contribute to upstream projects ourselves, and or then we might fork a downstream project from another thing that we see useful and use. But when it comes down to like managing really a core piece of open source infrastructure project, and if you want to pull it to another direction and the project lead wants to go to another direction, then that's a tough situation, and that becomes political. So you need to be a bit of a strategist there to really play the open source world the right way. And again, me being a software engineer as my background, it kind of helps because I understand what's happening, and I can make the company level decisions on those open source tool matters. If you we just like a few weeks ago decided to open source a key part of our tool chain, and it's a decision that you really cannot take back after it's done. It's there, it's out, it's open, it's Apache license, everyone can use it. So you really need to be confident in what you do and understand the consequences as when you're doing those decisions. But coming back to the product management side, in the end, when you are building your core offering, it's the same kind of thing as any product management decision. You have some of those open source factors affecting the world around you, but you still need to decide who are you building the product for. What's your vision for the next 3 months and next 6 months and so forth. So it doesn't change it too much, but you need to be mindful of the surroundings, I say.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you highlighted that in open source you can't turn things back. It's something that somebody else is from open source, from the database space, an open source database mentioned during our interviews as well. If you made something available in an open source, you can't take it back without troubles. It's not like the usual software. And another interesting theme with an open source is obviously pricing. What would you suggest? Maybe what would be your advice about pricing to anyone who tries to build open source project?
Yeah, that's a good one. So obviously you need a working business model to start something. There are projects that start by just being a cool piece of software and attracting a lot of GitHub stars. You get just a place with that, but I would hope that you have some sort of an idea of how you're going to monetize that in the end. And so we for instance use an open core model. So what we have actually in the open source side is that we have this open source automation stack that's built on Python. The bottom layer of the stack is Python. Then we have Robo Framework and a lot of automation libraries on top of that you can use to integrate to different kind of applications. Then we have a configuration format on top of that defines that software, that software robot, as we call it, that piece of automation. And then we have a tool chain on top of that to put it all together and make it a sort of a nice automation project that you can manipulate and configure and run it anywhere. So that's really the open source side. But then on top of that, well, obviously we do support developer tools as well. That's another thing. But on top of that is the operational layer that you will need to really use that automation stack in your kind of enterprise company setting. And so we realized early on when we started to apply Robo Framework into RPA that it can automate things that you can run locally. But when you want to actually sort of operate that automation in a company setting, you need scheduling, you need to be able to run it remotely on local networks and so forth. So we started applying like CI and CD tooling, like basic stuff like Jenkins on trying to see that could we actually operate this with CI tools. And it turned out that was a huge hassle and it wasn't really meant for that. So we figured out that, hey, we should create a platform that can be used to run this automation code anywhere in the cloud, inside containers, inside virtual machines, on local, on-prem machines, and anywhere that you need to run when you're running that in a company setting. So that's the proprietary crust that we built on top of that open core of the automation stack. So that's a really popular model right now and works well for many companies. For infrastructure companies, you have the basic hosting model. So you have like a database software like MongoDB or Timescale DB. You obviously have the hosting. There you have the scary proposition that Amazon is going to copy you and just host your open source database for you, and that's really scary. So I see that those companies are starting to apply a new licensing model. So it's open source, but not open source for hosting. So they kind of are blocking those cloud vendors from hosting it for them. So that's obviously, if you have that kind of an infrastructure platform thing, that's a good way to go. But be mindful of the big three cloud players competing against you. That would be a nice feeling probably to have. And then there's the kind of in my view, the legacy open source model, which is that of Red Hat, selling support and services. And I think like there's this false understanding in the world still that open source equals to support and services, and that's really not the case. And there are much more exciting business models and pricing models and opportunities to actually monetize open source software, and that's mainly because of the kind of vast cloud adoption in the world.
Thank you for highlighting all these three different approaches. and very interesting to learn maybe how did you arrive to the model that you actually use, how the process of customer development took place. Were you talking with enterprises or with developers, with the community to understand what exactly you can monetize, to understand that there is a bit associated with managing all that infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So in 2018, when I had this urge to push open source into the RPA world, I was working at this consulting firm that had acquired us. So I had actually a contractual obligation to be with them for a while. So I wasn't free to leave immediately. So I thought that, since I'm here, I should use the time wisely. And what I did with my co-founder Teppo was that we started a business unit inside that consulting firm where we started offering open source RPA as a service to companies around us. And so we took Robo Framework as an RPA tool to more than 10 sort of large company accounts. It included like logistics companies, banks, insurance, pension insurance, and manufacturing companies, and these kind of firms. And we served them with RPA services. And by doing that, we essentially learned a lot about the world of RPA, how the buyer thinks about RPA, what are the pain points in actually delivering those projects. And then, after a year of doing that, we had so much learnings that we knew exactly what we want to build.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting, Antti, that you mentioned this consulting component, because what I hear frequently among investors and sometimes among data scientists and engineers, they kind of neglect consulting a bit. We as investors also neglect it a bit, like, oh, it's consulting, it's scary, you need to stop with consulting as soon as possible and do product or platform or whatever you can turn into recurring revenues. But what you are saying is that actually there is a value within the consulting for you as for an entrepreneur, right? So you can...
Yeah, it's not a typical path, I'd say, but since I've been already in the software consulting world, running a business, I knew how the space works, and I could use the situation that I had to my benefit of actually like trying to run a business on RPA services. So now with Robocorp, a lot of our users are actually these smaller shops, RPA shops that offer Robocorp as a service to their clients. So they are automating mid-market companies, so small and medium companies, business processes with Robocorp. And our pricing model fits really well with them, our deployment model fits really well with them. But that's not a coincidence, because I had that personal experience of trying to see how that would work. So kind of stepping into the shoes of one of our customer groups, and also talking to those buyers before we created the company. So yeah, I know where the kind of that sort of attitude towards consulting comes from, and I don't say that anyone should go to consulting if they can avoid it, but for me it was a learning experience and something that I could actually take and leverage into a product business. But the model that often is mixed is that I'm going to start a consulting company, I'm going to do some gigs for my clients, and then I'm going to build a product on the side. And that usually doesn't work. So that's not a way, sort of the right way to approach it, because then you are like working most of your time to client projects, building some products really on the side, and then when the first client wants to adapt it, you just tailor it to their need, and you kind of throw the vision into the trash bin, and off it goes.
Yeah. That's probably not the scenario that I would also suggest to people. But what's important, in my opinion, is to appreciate your experience, what I'm saying, because sometimes people spend a lot of time doing research projects or maybe consulting projects, and data science in particular, doing something at Upwork, or doing some Kaggle competitions, etc. And then they kind of discount that. Oh, I don't have any business experience, or I don't have that and that and that. And what I'm trying to learn is is there any way to capitalize on that experience? And your example shows that yes, there is a way to learn from pretty much anything you do. And to me, it's very,
Absolutely.
very important. And I wanted to look also on timing. You were really thinking about that idea for quite a while. Were there any external events, maybe in the market and macroeconomy, whatever, that provoked you to start it at exact moment, or it mostly internal factors that came together and you made the decision? How did it look like?
Yeah. Obviously, if I could have started a year or two earlier, I would have done it. That time, I think the market would have been probably not ready for it. So we came to right now. I mean, right now I see a new RPA tool come up every week,
Yeah.
literally. Like, it's becoming a hugely crowded market, and but they're all sort of replicating what the big three. So you have big three: UiPath, Automation Anywhere, and Repurposing, and these are really the top leading players in the space. There's a sort of a group of second tier companies that have been around for a long time, and then there are all these upstarts that are popping up and replicating some aspects of the big three. And for me, those upstarts are really not that scary as a competition, because I typically check that, you know, if they don't have pricing available on their side, if I can download the tools immediately, they're no competition, because they're not really product driven companies at all, as we are. So but timing wise, yeah, so when we decided to start, RPA had been already declared to be one of the or the fastest growing segment in enterprise software, and that was a signal that, you know, there's going to be a big market behind this. We knew all the flaws that the technology has, but still, like, starting a company and starting to build it out, you have a lot of inertia before you get to a state where you're actually a credible offering. So right now we have a good product out in the market, and we are iterating on it fast, and we are getting traction from users, and even larger companies are looking at it seriously. But if I would have been able to be in this situation a year earlier, it would have been, you know, obviously better. But it, you know, I think, like, some people say that the right timing is when it feels too early.
Mm-hmm.
And building something completely new. When we started out, nobody had heard of applying open source into RPA. After we were already going, I saw that, you know, at the same time there were a few other people starting similar projects. None of them really got off the ground like properly, but we managed to do it, and we really are the kind of the dominating player in this segment of the market.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how do you think about the trends in RPA right now? More specifically, do you believe that there are some space? I don't want to say niche, right? Niche is too small. Probably some white spaces, some opportunities for other startups. So people will be listening us. Do they need to think about startups in RPA, or it's like it's done, it's too late?
I probably nothing's never done in that regard. I don't believe in that. If you don't have any competition, that's scary, because it's, you know, you're on a market that hasn't been validated. So I'd rather go into a crowded market than one that doesn't have any competition, although it sounds kind of counterintuitive. RPA, certainly, if I would have to start making money off of it right now, I'd start a services company and use Robocorp. We have, you know, a lot of firms out there who, you know, just one of our partners just last week, they signed a contract for $500,000 to automate processes for a legal services company. So if I would need to make money immediately, I'd do that. But the way we are looking at the market right now is that the mid market, really anything below large enterprises, is fairly unserved. The market penetration is still fairly low, even though some of these players might claim otherwise. I think the market is still in an expansion phase where we're going to see a kind of wave of adoption continuing for the next few years. And the mid market, like I said, it's untouched. So there's a lot of opportunity, and so the need to automate is really prevalent across any size of any type of company. When you look at the world right now, on the agenda of any sort of CEO or CIO running an operation, they'll have, you know, analytics, AI, and automation. Those are all on their agenda, and that's going to be a huge thing as we see this market growing and adapting new technologies. So definitely not late to be in the game, but you know, there's some inertia getting started, obviously, always.
Correct me if my analogy will be bad, but let's think about RPA and another kind of hot technology, let's say machine learning, right? So how I think sometimes about the market, there are machine learning platforms like H2O, very generic platforms, right? And at the same time, a new wave of companies emerge that do, for instance, let's do synthetic data only, how to generate synthetic data. Or let's think about security in the context of models, how we can make them really secure, cyber secure, and etc., etc., etc. So you kind of see the fragmentation of the stack, if I may call it. Do you think that similar things will happen in RPA, and the opportunities there will be more or less significant in terms of the sizes?
Yeah, so there is already something like that happening to a degree. So you have so the basic RPA, which is like essentially automating things that you can do with a browser and desktop applications and so forth. And we don't even talk about RPA that much inside Robocorp. We talk about automation because we see that we have Python-based stack, so we can apply it to RPA, in what's called intelligent automation in the field, which is essentially combining machine learning models and anything that can be vaguely resemble AI to automation. That's intelligent automation in the industry speak. And then, you know, IT automation, and then just general like enterprise software integrations. All of these can be put under the umbrella of automation that we focus on. So, but there we have some of the big players are starting to talk about really terms like hyper automation, which essentially means combining RPA to intelligent automation to process discovery. And it's all about, it's really this hype acronym soup right now, the whole field. But I'm seeing that the process discovery space is going to be one area that's going to be sort of separated from the main automation stack. So that's really about understanding what you need, what you can, and what you need to automate in the first place. There's companies like Celone is a big one, and then there are like upstarts trying to come in the space, and that's a like crazy difficult problem to actually like understand from the way people use computers and way data flows inside your enterprise information systems, and looking at that and seeing like, hey, we could automate that. It's actually a super intimidating problem to me, and but still there's a lot of people trying to do that. Then we see some things around portability of automation, about obviously security of automation is a topic, and then maintainability and debugging and all of that. But I think with us, when we are coming from this Python world, we can already apply a lot of the sort of software industry best practices. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel for automation specifically. But yeah, there's attempts to form these categories, I'd say so.
That's really fantastic. You already described a bunch of galaxies, a bunch of themes within the universe of automation. And I really suggest anyone who thinks about a startup to look at these potential sectors and look at what Robocorp is doing. Super interesting. To be cautious of your time, probably the last question on my side. Now, we covered a lot of interesting things, I'm sure, and obviously we can cover a lot of more. But is there any question or theme or topic maybe that we didn't cover, but you believe deserves to be covered, and you maybe want to comment on that? Given that our audience are data scientists, engineers, researchers, something useful and important for them to learn about.
Yeah. So I mean, I'd say that for the data crowd, I'd say that don't overlook the automation trend, because a lot of things that we talk about inside our companies, that we are building essentially hands, that can access a lot of places, that can make things happen in your IT systems or in the real world. But really the brains are going to be the decision-making systems that the ML AI space is building. So we see that there's a huge synergy there, and applying those skills creatively into areas where you have automation being adopted inside companies. That's really interesting for me. So I see that a lot of companies are struggling with things that to this audience might seem trivial, like processing invoices, like automatically reading data from invoices, structuring that, and feeding it to an ERP system. That's in huge demand right now, and if you have a good solution for that, you can't sell more, like enough of it. But that's like a trivial sounding problem. But I think I'm saying that the problem that you're going after doesn't always need to be so sort of fancy and high flying. Sometimes a more sort of simple thing can work. And also kind of thinking through that lens, when you're thinking about starting a company, starting a business, like I said, it doesn't always need to be a completely white space without any competition. That's going to be a red flag for any investor out there, that why isn't there any competition? Rather, with us, we had companies like UiPath that has raised $1 billion in funding to this day, but it's a validation that there's actually a working market that we can attack. So that's how we are thinking about it. It's good to have competition, and you don't need to always reinvent everything in order to start a company. And I think the final piece is that you probably know a lot of things that like 99.9% of the world doesn't know. So don't discount the specific knowledge that you have in your specific domain.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Antti, for this optimism and for spending your time with us today. Really looking forward to hear a lot of interesting news from you and from Robocorp. So really, thank you once again.
Thank you. It was nice talking.